wanted to get away from what I thought was an overly simplified picture of the development of science that saw it as, on the one side, either as one continuous progressive line of development or of gestalt switches, radical breaks that were incommensurable, unable to be compared in some ways. And in its place, over the course of the last years, I have tried to develop a picture where different domains of science are able to communicate, but partially, a little bit the way two different cultures might meet at the boundary and begin to form a pidgin or a creole. It's become a tool for me, a way of understanding the way knowledge gets put together at the boundary.
Evolutionary biology, when it only considers genes, enzymes, proteins, and so on, and natural selection, leaves all kinds of holes in the story, which can be taken advantage of by creationists and intelligent design people. Most of those holes can be plugged by incorporating far from equilibrium thermodynamics into evolutionary theory. Far from equilibrium thermodynamics, it reveals matter as capable of self-organization. The matter that genes act on is an active matter, is a morphogenetic matter, so that all that genes have to do is guide this active, morphogenetically pregnant matter in different directions to produce different species, and you don't have to count on genes to do everything. So from a philosopher's point of view, particularly a philosopher like Gilles Deleuze, who is a process realist, that is, who believes that reality exists independently of our minds, your notion of matter, your concept of matter becomes different. And therefore art then will become not a form that the artist cerebrally imposes on an inert matter, but a partnership with matter, in which form comes from the interaction between the human and the non-human.
The body, it is an extra intelligent being which somehow compensates itself upon a certain challenge. I started to look for different artists which somehow are very honestly vulnerable, very honestly searching, using their own existence as material. In this process of searching, emanating a certain lightness, a certain aura, a certain vibration, from where it comes from. You cannot avoid to speak about the global body of today. In different corners of the world, the information goes immediately through us. Somebody here in Venice, and somebody in New York, or somebody in São Paulo had at the same time the same idea or the same intuition. How this energy circulates, how it works. These antennas of the artists, where this electricity comes from.
The whole thing about waveforms is that they exist throughout the spectrum, in macro and micro scale. But the funny thing is the human ear only perceives, again, this is more of a biophysics kind of scenario, but the human ear only hears within a certain small spectrum. The human being is almost just synchronizing these things and just trying to exist in a world where you're having these overlapping waveforms that in one level or another influence your full living pattern, you know. You're looking at the human structures we've made. This is what McLuhan always kinds of points out, is that we are turning ourselves inside out almost, like the electrical networks are an extension of our nervous system, or the way memory works is now getting outsourced to all these devices around us, camera, iPod, you name it. So we let them remember for us.
When individuals feel profoundly connected with the world, in heightened religious awareness, lost in the dance, metaphorically, there is an area in the brain which ceases to function. So what is happening there on a very fundamental level is that we are putting ourselves in touch with our mode of awareness that existed prior to the evolution of complex language systems. And in that mode, we are blissfully one with the environment.
And that concept of evolution is kind of interesting because there is evolution and devolution. It flows out from the source and it flows back into the source. And the smallest increment of time is one flowing outwards and back inwards. And the proportions change, and that's how we experience change. The intelligence of the body is by nature a grosser intelligence, so it's bound down in the physical world. But you can take that level of vibration and you can refine it to the point that it's comparable to the level of vibration of the mind, which, as we all know, is very fleet and, like quicksilver, will get away from you. Once you've got that sense of refinement, you can then have an attitude of expectation, an attitude of poise, a beginner's mind, an attitude of receptiveness. And everything around us basically boils down to the proportion of these qualities. There's the tendency to change, the tendency to stay the same, and pure existence without the tendency to change or to stay the same.
I think there's a point at which scientists do realize that there is the great excluded middle, and that there is contradiction, but they don't see it as contradiction. They call it a bifurcation. They develop a word to explain this phenomenon. And it usually occurs at the level of subatomic particles, where the basic rules of reason do not hold at all. There's not one world, but many, many worlds that are going on simultaneously, and there is movement between and among these worlds. And logos is one word for nature itself. Okay, it's one word for being itself, as a kind of oneness. Now, though there are these disparate things, they still fall under this oneness, which scientists feel, I think most scientists feel very comfortable with.
They use zero-point energy, implicate order. It's the holographic, it's the spectral domain. I call it holoflux. The hologram is basically a set of interference patterns between ripples. If we didn't have lenses and other lens-like structures in all of our senses, the world would look to us as if it were a hologram.
Science is about asking questions, not just to find the last, give the last word. Yes, we want to find the answers. This is why we ask the questions. But as soon as we get an answer, we have other 10 questions that we want to answer. To be a dancer, you have to use a lot of laws of physics. For me, dance is more like a language. As math is a language of science, and as often happens when people are able to speak more than one language, there is a deeper understanding of the meaning of the words. At the end, we all talk about nature, and we all talk about human beings.
In a different way, Heidegger is trying to get away from the human description of the world, although he passes through the human description of the world to get at other things. He's nonetheless, he sees the history of being as being a larger history of which we are only a part, maybe a crucial part, but not the center in some way. And oddly enough, and in very different ways, physicists also would like to have a description of the world that doesn't depend too much on the all-too-human. And it's been a debate within physics for many years. Einstein hated the idea that in quantum mechanics we irreducibly interfere with the world. And he wanted to have a description that was somehow had the classical austerity of a completely outside description, outside of the human. So there may be some aspects that are similar to that, and the drive to try to get outside ourselves, to know the world in our absence in some ways.